great to see you all. This will be painless. I'd like to start, by the way, we recognize Hassan, who owns the tea room, but I don't know whether you all know this, and I didn't know it till tonight. I'm embarrassed. We did it last year as well. He picked up the tab for everything. It's not merely he made it available, but it's really, he's a great supporter, and he's a fine man. I just want to personally thank him in front of all the folks that are here. And Cameron, thank you for the introduction. I got a chance to talk to Cameron's mom earlier today, and she done good. Folks, Connie and Elaine, we're fortunate to have them both back again to help us shine a light on It's On Us. And I want to thank Adriana and Vlad, they're both here tonight, as you both heard about them, for the courage that they both demonstrated. But, you know, they represent the best of what I envisioned when I created the It's On Us program 5 years ago. Adriana told me about that late night campus event that she was off campus, and she saw this woman walking down a driveway, partially clothed, exposed, and a group of men taking photographs of her and harassing her. And when I saw her, I expected her to be 6'4", 240 pounds, but she walked up, she literally grabbed the young woman by the hand who was heavily inebriated and took her into a house, got her roommate to come and get her, and got her in a safe place. And that took enough courage all by itself. But then she walked back out. She walked back out and she confronted the men and tried to actually, I think, confiscate their iPhones. They were flashing photos out of her head. And here's the deal. She made it clear, all 5'2" of her, that she told them they better damn well delete those photos. She told them behavior was unacceptable, and that they had taken advantage of a drunk woman, and it was totally, totally inappropriate. While she may not have gotten through to one of them, she knew that at least one person had made it clear that their behavior was not okay, her. She even then went the next day to the Title IX coordinator on the College Hunter campus to report what happened and to make sure that the woman was protected and that the men would be held accountable if a single solitary photo surfaced on campus. Again, that only took courage. It took some leadership for her to do that. And it took courage to confront those predators even after she made the woman safe. Part of going back out, confront them in the driveway. You know, Adriana, you did whatever you could to support a complete stranger and to hold the men accountable for their behavior. And so, let me talk a minute about Vlad. One night, as you already know about this, but early morning, he was at a house party just off campus. Probably around 40 people were at that party, and he noticed one guy being particularly aggressive toward more than one woman. And he noticed that the guy was, that they were incredibly uncomfortable, and the guy was dead drunk. He went up and grabbed the guy, talked to him, and realized that he was very intoxicated. And he came up with a plan. It included one of his closest friends. First, they removed the guy from the situation, got him in the room, and one of his good friends took him home. They got a hold of one of his friends. But the remarkable part to me is the next day, Vlad went to talk to this guy, looked him up. He was sobered up with a hangover. He explained to him what had happened and that his behavior was totally inappropriate. The guy became extremely apologetic. He said he had too much to drink, and Vlad went on and said, that's no excuse. You have to condition yourself to know better. Vlad, you've done a hard thing to call out the rape culture on the campus, even among your closest friends. And you've disrupted the culture that allows sexual violence to continue. You're teaching young people on your campus and around the world that it's truly a need to change the culture. Now, without talking to, I spend a lot of time on college campuses. And the truth of the matter is, everybody can do something. I don't expect everyone to be a hero. I mean that sincerely. It's hard. It's hard. It's hard sometimes for a guy that's 5'6" to go up to a 230-pound lineman who's molesting a girl and do something, to confront him. But you can do something. You can holler. You can call the police. You can make it known it's happening. Same with you women. I don't expect you to put your life on the line to save people. That's asking too much. Some will do it. But everybody can do something. You can be engaged. It's a responsibility we have, and it really is. We need more people on every campus. Not just on campuses. We need them joining the workplace, in the government, everywhere. You have an obligation when you see in the workplace one of your colleagues being assaulted or molested or even just harassed, to speak out, to speak up. And if you don't have the courage to do that because you're afraid to lose a job, report the person. There's a lot that can be done. It's on all of us, not just heroes, it's on all of us. So, it's not just about showing courage at your school. It's to be leaders in your community. Speak out, speak up. I really believe this. My dad used to say, the greatest sin of all was the abuse of power. And the cardinal sin was for a man to raise his hand to a woman or a child. All of us have an obligation to get involved, to change the culture. My hope is that after hearing the stories of Adriana and Vlad, you get inspired to step up, show courage, and just speak out. Again, I'm not asking people to throw themselves in front of a bus. But there's everything, just hollering. Just literally hollering when you see something going on can disrupt it, give a person a chance to get away. People often ask me, as I said, why I got involved, because I've been so passionate about this for the past 30 years as a United States Senator, my whole life, because I was raised thank God, they think my mother was abused, or my sister, or my wife, because of my passion about it. But it was my dad. My dad was an honorable man, and he taught us. He never raised a hand to any one of us, never once. My dad was a gentle man, but he abhorred the notion of abuse of power, told us we had an obligation to get engaged. If we see it, do something. It's also because 28 years ago I chaired the Senate Judiciary Committee, a hearing the first of its kind, the Clarence Thomas hearing, the appointment of a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court, and a brave lawyer, a really notable woman, Anita Hill, a professor, showed the courage of a lifetime, talking about her experience being harassed by Clarence Thomas. We knew a lot less about the extent of harassment back then, over 30 years ago. But she paid a terrible price. She was abused through the hearing. She was taken advantage of. Her reputation was attacked. I wish I could have done something. I opposed Clarence Thomas' nomination. I voted against him. But I also realized there was a real and perceived problem the committee faced. There were a bunch of white guys. No, I mean this sincerely. A bunch of white guys hearing this testimony in the Senate Judiciary Committee. So when Anita Hill came to testify, she faced a committee that didn't fully understand what the hell it was all about. To this day, I regret I couldn't come up with a way to get her the kind of hearing she deserved, given the courage she showed by reaching out to us. The hearing she deserved was a hearing where she was respected, where the tone of the questioning was not hostile and insulting, where the fact that she stepped forward was recognized as an act of courage in and of itself. Because let's face it, back in 1991, it took a lot of courage to take on a man who was so much a part of the establishment and the power structure. It took a lot of courage to damage her own career and her own reputation in the face of the cultural bias that if a woman was harassed or abused, she must have done something to deserve it. It still takes courage. Nearly 30 years later, and I publicly apologized to Anita because she didn't get the hearing she deserved. And the Senate Judiciary Committee has the power and obligation to set a standard for the nation. It should not be one of the most difficult places for a woman to lay out a story of abuse and harassment. And yet last fall you saw it all over again in the Kavanaugh hearing. Almost 30 years. The culture, the institutional culture has not changed. And that diminishes the likelihood that other women will come forward knowing what they're going to face. When a woman sees a distinguished professor or a lawyer subject to that kind of cultural backlash, whether it was Dr. Ford or Professor Hill, saw what they endured, it's understandable that they're reluctant to step forward and tell their own stories of harassment or abuse. Folks, I realize I get a little too passionate about this sometimes, but we all have an obligation to do nothing less than change the culture in this country. That's just the laws. We change the laws. Change the culture. The culture. You all know what the phrase rule of thumb means? Where it's derived from? In English common law, not codification, common law. Back in the late 1300s, so many women were dying at the hands of their husbands because they were a chattel, just like the cattle or the sheep, that the court of common law decided they had to do something about the extent of the death. So you know what they said? No man has a right to chastise his woman with a rod thicker than the circumference of his thumb. This is English jurisprudential culture. A white man's culture. It's got to change. It's got to change. Because, ladies and gentlemen, you know, some of you may remember there was a lovely, in every sense of the word, model named Marla Hanson up here in New York. And during this period when I held 1,000 hours of hearings on this act, it took me 4 years to get it passed, she had been abused by her landlord. She had a I think she was in the upper 60s or 50s, in a lovely apartment building with a restaurant bar at the base and the first floor. And she had an efficiency apartment, and she wanted to get a one-bedroom. But every time she went to see her landlord, he harassed her. He came on to her heavy. So she decided she wanted to get her deposit back and leave. She was on location here in New York City shooting for, I don't know what the commercial was or what it was for. She got a call saying he had a one-bedroom apartment he'd rent to her. Stop at the restaurant, had a bar in the restaurant, and he let her sign the papers for a one-bedroom. So she stopped in after her work, and he hit on her again. So she got up and walked out. This guy had hired 2 goons to follow her out and take razors and slash her face. And they slashed her face. That's how she made her living. And so I wanted her to testify. But I wanted to warn her ahead of time how tough it would be, even in that circumstance. So I went up, I saw her and talked about what she was going to be asked. And I said, what did your mother say to you when she learned of it? She said, my mother said, why was I in a bar? And what'd your best girlfriend say? And the best of my recollection, they asked questions like, were you wearing underwear? Did you have a bra on? How short was your skirt? You women haven't been a whole lot better early on. As vice president, when I got Title IX engaged, I invited 151 college presidents to the White House. They didn't want to come. Tell them it was their obligation under Title IX. We denied them federal funds. They didn't protect women more. The more prestigious the college, the less they did. Because they don't want anybody to know the number of events that occur on their campus they're supposed to report. I can give you chapter and verse on the colleges where a woman goes to the president's office to report, gets sent to an office, and gets asked the question, what were you wearing? Were you drunk? What did you say or do? This god-awful presumption. The woman must have done something. When I was writing the legislation, I had 2 brilliant women. One's still a professor and the other one is retired, who helped write the law. And I said, we're having trouble getting it passed. So I want you to go and look at every state legislature, how they treat in their law, their criminal justice system, women who are men who are accused of abuse and convicted. In almost every state, there was a presumption that a woman must have done something. I'll give you an example. My own state of Delaware, a progressive state, had a law. If, God forbid, leaving here, someone jumped out of an alley and brutally raped you, that person, if found, could be held to first-degree rape and go to prison for life. But if you went out with someone voluntarily and they did the exact same thing to you, under the law, you could not be tried for first-degree rape, only second degree. The presumption, you must have done something. You must have done something. I won't bore you. I'm keeping you standing too long, but we changed the laws. We haven't changed the culture yet. Ladies and gentlemen, the Courage Award winners today are living examples that we are making strides. But our leaders in both parties have an obligation to change the culture of our institutions as well. Unless we change the culture of our institutions, how do we change the culture of the nation? I struggle with this since those Anita Hill hearings. What should we have done differently? What can we do differently to make sure a woman who's been harassed or assaulted doesn't go through a second round of assessment or public rape again, simply because they had the courage to step forward? It's simply wrong. And we have to begin to look at things differently, in my humble opinion. For example, a mistake we made early on, we thought that we should conduct a hearing of harassment for a Supreme Court justice. Everybody thought we should conduct it like we would hear in a courtroom. Guess what? It's a job interview. No one's entitled to be in the Supreme Court. No one's entitled to be in the United States Senate. No one's entitled to hold any public office. They have to make their case. The presumption should be, if the woman comes forward, she's likely telling the truth, as a presumption that the man is telling the truth. But it's an equal presumption. It's a job interview. We have to work toward allowing a process that allows a person making a credible accusation to receive a fair hearing. For my part, I came out of those hearings determined to never again would a female witness stand before an all-male Judiciary Committee. So I campaigned that year. I continued to write the Violence Against Women Act to try to get it passed. And I campaigned for 3 very talented women on one condition, that if they got elected, they'd come on the committee. None of them wanted to. But they made a commitment. That's why Dianne Feinstein's the #1 person in that committee now. Well, secondly, there was a woman named Carol Mosley Braun who later was defeated, but she was on the committee. Folks, until we get to the point where we have women voices on the committees speaking up, I think those things aren't going to change very well. I also continue to work on had I already begun the Violence Against Women Act to redouble the efforts to get it passed. It took 4 years, a long time. A lot of people in organizations told me I had no right to be involved. You go back and, as my wife, a professor, says, Google it. You'll see that when I set up, I talked about domestic abuse being the secret, the dirty little secret that had to be aired in public, because I was convinced that the American public, if we ripped the Band-Aid off and they looked at it, they'd respond. But I was told, no, it's a private family matter, abuse. It's my woman. It's a private family matter. I'm going to break up families. The hard religious right went after me. I was going to destroy families. The domestic shelters we authorized and the millions of dollars we spent to protect women. By the way, you know, the vast majority of children and homeless on the street are there because their mothers are victims of violence. Well, you know what I was told? I was told these shelters were Biden indoctrination centers to radicalize women. But I knew we had to get the dirty little secret out. And if we did, the vast majority of the American people would support us. As I said, we had to rip off the Band-Aid, expose the abuse, Because again, buried deep in our culture is this, our psyche, just as is with harassment, was the idea that women themselves are to blame. And think about yourselves. I happen to be a Catholic. There's a phrase we use, examine your conscience. Examine your conscience about women you know who may have been on the wrong end of abuse. Ask yourself whether you ever questioned, what did they do? I don't think anybody in this room probably did. But folks, no one, no man has a right to lay a hand on a woman, no matter what she's wearing, what she does, who she is, unless it's in self-defense. Never. Never, never. There was a case when I was doing the Violence Against Women Act where I got the rape shield law passed, where a judge dismissed a case of a woman who walked into a bar wearing a short skirt and no underwear. And she was raped. And he said she asked for it and let the guy off. He was taken off the court. Not allowed to ask that question anymore in court. What were you wearing? But look, you and I have an obligation to the thousands and thousands of women, an obligation to do nothing short of change the culture. Those of you who have young boys, young girls, indoctrinate in them what they're required to do. We can make them safer in their homes and in public. We have to hold predators of domestic violence and sexual accountable for their crime. Make them the pariah, not the victim. And by the way, men are victims as well. The number of abuse cases of men being raped by other men on campus in the gay community is real. It's real. But at the end of the day, it's never the fault of the victim. Assault is a crime. So we got to keep fighting. In 1994, VAWA became a law. It's one of the proudest achievements of my career. And one more step to help change the culture around these issues. When I was vice president, one of the things I asked the president to do was allow me to oversee the Violence Against Women Act from the vice president's office. And he did. And the Attorney General did not object as well, where the office actually resides. At one point, I asked the leading lawyers on my staff, again, this brilliant woman named Cynthia Hogan. She's the one that the NFL hired at my recommendation after that football player dragged his wife out of the elevator by the hair. Remember that? 10 years earlier, nothing would have happened. Nothing would have happened. But they hired her to help change. And I want to thank the NFL for being here today and professional football players, because they're stepping up. But Cynthia Hogan, I asked her to go check the Bureau of Justice statistics to keep all the statistics on crime, because I want to know what progress we're making. She came back in the office. It was the most disappointing legislative day in my life. We made progress across the board except in one category. Women and girls between the ages of 16 and 24. They continue to experience the highest rates of sexual violence. Nothing had changed since I drafted the law almost 2 decades earlier. 1 in 5 of them continue to be sexually assaulted while they're in college. Same percentage that happened back when we passed the legislation. Despite the incredible progress to reduce violence in general, young people, young women, were still suffering. I knew we had to do more. So I had them set up a virtual town meeting where thousands of high school and college people were on the call. I spoke about this. And I asked them at the end, I said, go to this particular website and tell me what you think we should be doing to make it safer for you on campus and in your high school. And I was surprised and embarrassed I didn't know the answer. Spontaneously, almost a majority gave a straightforward answer. They said, you've got to get men involved. That's when I asked the president in 2014 if I could launch the It's On Us to do just that, get more men involved. Get everyone involved. not just to prevent sexual assault on campuses, but to fundamentally change the culture if we started earlier. Over the last 4 years, it's been mentioned, It's On Us program has grown to a national movement. More than 5,500 It's On Us events have taken place in more than 500 college campuses in all 50 states. During this year, there are 175 officially registered It's On Us chapters across the country. When I go to the campus, I go to the football teams, I go to all the fraternities, I have them all come, and I challenge them. If you see a brother taking an inebriated co-ed up the stairs of your fraternity house and you don't go and stop it, you're a damn coward. You don't deserve to be called a man. I mean that sincerely. You don't deserve to be called a man. There's nothing manly about this. It means changing the culture in the locker room, how you talk about women. Usually the guys in the locker room talk about what I got last night. Usually the ugliest sons of guns in the place. Usually the guys who have not at all attractive. No, I'm serious. I promise you. I spend a lot of time in locker rooms playing ball. 440,000 people on campuses have taken the pledge to get engaged and get involved. Last year alone, in 2018, the Fall Week of Action pledge drive, we generated another 15,000 new pledges and signers. Just 1 week. I've reached out to celebrities to get involved. Everyone has said yes. How can I help? Almost no one has said no. Alyssa Milano, Adam Devine, my friend Lady Gaga. You know, she asked me to introduce her when she was nominated the Academy Awards for her song, Until It Happens to You. Over 50 million Americans watched it, another 20 million worldwide watched it. Not only remember, but she had with her 50 young students, every one of whom I spent time with. About 20% of their parents never know they were abused as they walked out on stage as victims of abuse. It took a lot of courage. Gave a lot of people courage to come forward. So you feel like we're making progress? We are making progress. But not enough. People are taking notice. The world is listening. I wrote another act I couldn't get past, or a vice president I couldn't get past. An international Violence Against Women Act. Diminishing our foreign aid to countries who don't protect women. If we do that for other things, why don't we do that here? That's why it's too important for you, for the people in this room, to do anything other than keep fighting. You've got to fight harder, because it's about more than campuses. Sweeping movements like #MeToo and #TimesUp are lifting up voices, giving thousands of women the courage to come forward, holding the powerful accountable. It's about changing the culture everywhere. As I've said, sexual assault is about the abuse of power. It's about power. It's not about sex. It's about power. And the most insidious abuse of power of all that we know. And right now, we live in a culture where the abuse of power is allowed to penetrate the highest offices of government, where it lives in boardrooms and global corporations. It poisons entire industries from Hollywood to hotel workers. It pushes down women all around the world, limiting their opportunity and restricting their freedom. You have a right, a constitutional right to be safe. When we don't stand up to violence, we give it more power. We give it a promotion. And here's the point I want to make to you. You know, I've taught my children as my father taught me. My father was what the Jewish community called a righteous Christian. He was a Catholic. But at dinner table, we'd sit and have conversation and incidentally eat. And he railed against our unwillingness to bomb the railroad tracks. He railed against what happened. And he talked about silence being complicity. So when each of my children and my grandchildren turns 15, I put them on a plane and flew directly to Dachau. I wanted them to see that sign over the entrance of work will set you free. But what I really wanted them to see was all those beautiful homes right along the fence line that had been there the whole time. And people knew what was going on, pretended they knew nothing. They remained silent. They remained silent. So you may think I'm being harsh with you, but it's not enough just to be brave. You're complicitous if you don't say something. Silence. Silence is complicity. Vlad and Adriana, they get it. People who do the hard thing to make the situation right. People who don't tolerate predators, who stand up to rape culture. And this is where I'm asking you to come in. I know we can all do better. So talk to your friends. Point out to them that they have an obligation. Not to do what these two brave people did, but just to holler, to be witness, to say something. We have to change the standard of decency, how we measure ourselves. I'm optimistic. I've seen how young people are taking action like never before. Not just folks who stood up tonight, as I said, but everywhere. Look at the folks here tonight, our two honorees. I know the future's in good hands. And next week, in honor of Sexual Assault Awareness Month, tens of thousands of students nationwide are participating in the 2019 It's On Us Spring Week of Action. And I know I can count on all of you to keep and do your part. We've come a long way, but there's so much further to go. We have to keep working, keep fighting. You know, I got elected to the United States Senate as a 29-year-old kid. I wasn't old enough to be sworn in. I had to wait. No, for real. I wasn't. You have to be 30 to be sworn in. I was only 29. And I come from a modest background. I'm the first United States Senator I ever knew. Not a joke. And I met a guy who was a wonderful guy named Hubert Humphrey when I was a kid, 29 years old. And he used to say the measure of who we are is how we treat the oldest and youngest among us. Presumptuous of me to improve on anything Hubert Humphrey said, but like him, I was a vice president. Like him, I served longer in the Senate. Let me tell you something else. I think how civilized we are viewed to be by future generations will be determined by how we treat victims of abuse. That is the measure of our decency. That is a measure of who we are. And it matters. The world's looking at us. Believe it or not, the women's movement in America is a standard used around the world. I was in India at the request of the president, who was vice president. And I went to the place a home where Mahatma Gandhi was sheltered for a while. And I met his granddaughter with a group of women who maintain this facility. You know what they asked? They asked to meet with me privately. They said, can you help us? Can you help us write a Violence Against Women Act for India? For India. The rest of the world's looking at us. We can not only change the culture here, we can begin to change the way women live and what they endure around the world, and men who are victims of sexual assault as well. I've taken too much of your time. I apologize for being so passionate about this. But I apologize for taking your time, not apologize for my views. So guys, we can do this. This is now the time not to let up one little bit. Thank you all for all you do. I love you for what you do.